Your card declines on a Tuesday, not at a restaurant, not on something optional, at the pharmacy. The prescription costs $67. You have $43 in your checking account and $0 in anything else. This is not a catastrophe in the cinematic sense. It is not the kind of moment that makes it into a story you tell later. It is just a Tuesday at a pharmacy counter with a pharmacist waiting and your phone calculator open, and the specific quiet humiliation of not having $67 when you need $67. This is what life without a financial cushion actually feels like. Not dramatic, just narrow. Every month slightly too tight to breathe. And the worst part is not that Tuesday. The worst part is that Tuesday was predictable. The prescription was not a surprise. The car repair last month was not a surprise. The dental bill in March was not a surprise. These things arrive on a schedule that your life has been producing for years, and every time they arrive you are somehow unprepared for them, and every time you are unprepared, the cost of being unprepared is higher than the original bill. This is the story of what happens to your life when you never build the thing that was supposed to prevent all of that. And it is also the story of what changes when you finally do. There's a specific financial state that most people live in that has no official name in any personal finance textbook. It is not poverty. It is not middle-class prosperity. It is the state of earning enough that the obvious danger feels manageable, and saving enough that you believe you'll be fine until you're not fine. And by then something has broken and you are paying for the break. And the break is exactly the size of the cushion you never built. You earned $3,800 a month. You spent $3,650 of it. The remaining $150 stays in the checking account until the next unexpected thing arrives and absorbs it. You do this for months, sometimes for years. The balance fluctuates between $140 and $400 depending on the week. It never grows because there is no mechanism for it to grow. You are spending down to your floor every month, and your floor is not a floor. It is a threshold you hover above and occasionally fall beneath. Most Americans are here. Not the bottom, not the top, but here. In this specific middle zone where the income feels adequate and the cushion is essentially imaginary and the distance between current stability and a real disruption is measured in weeks. A 2023 Federal Reserve survey found that 37% of American adults could not cover a $400 emergency expense without borrowing money or selling something. Not $4,000, $400. That number has appeared in various surveys for a decade now, and it still lands wrong every time you read it, because the implication of that number is not that these people are irresponsible. The implication is that the distance between normal and crisis is $400, and $400 is a car repair, a medical copay, a broken appliance, a tire, a parking ticket that doubled because you forgot to pay it. This is where you live before you build the cushion. Not in danger exactly. Just adjacent to it, permanently and without insulation, something breaks. It does not matter what. Choose whichever version fits your life. The car that was making a sound you were monitoring. The furnace that had one bad winter in it still. The knee that had been intermittently sending warnings. The employer who announced restructuring and included your department in the announcement. The thing breaks, and you get the number. The number is $1,400. Sometimes it is $800, sometimes it is $3,000. The exact amount matters less than the fact that it exceeds everything liquid you currently own. You have three options. The first is the credit card. You put it on the card and you tell yourself you will pay it off in 2 months. Sometimes you do. Most of the time, the 2 months becomes 4 months because another thing happened in month 2 and the balance got pushed out, and the interest is now compounding at 24% on a balance you did not choose to carry. The $1,400 repair becomes a $1,580 repair by the time you have paid it off 8 months later. The second is the family loan. Your parents or your sibling or the person in your life who has the money and who will lend it without charging interest but also without completely forgetting it. The money appears and the problem is solved and the debt is informal, but it is real and it sits in the room every time you see that person. And sometimes it affects the relationship in ways that are hard to measure and impossible to fully undo. You pay it back when you can. Sometimes when you cannot. The third is the payment plan. The mechanic will take $350 now and the rest over 90 days. The hospital will bill you monthly in small amounts. The dentist's office has a financing partner with a 6-month zero-interest option if your credit qualifies. You take the plan and you add the payment to the monthly obligations, and the margin you already don't have gets narrower. All three of these paths are functional. All three of them work in the sense that the problem gets solved. None of them are free. Each one carries a cost that the person with a funded emergency account does not pay. The cost is not always financial. Sometimes it is the emotional weight of the informal debt. Sometimes it is the interest on the card. Sometimes it is just the knowledge that you are 2 weeks away from a real crisis and nothing has changed to prevent the next one. The person with $9,000 in a savings account takes that same $1,400 hit and feels nothing except the mild annoyance of paying for an unexpected expense. The account goes from $9,000 to $7,600. They refill it over the next 4 months. Life continues without reorganizing itself around the disruption. The disruption was absorbed. That absorption is the entire value of the emergency fund. Not growth, not returns, not wealth building. Absorption. The capacity to take the hit and continue moving without the hit redirecting your entire financial trajectory for the next 8 months. It is difficult to calculate what not having an emergency fund costs you because the cost is distributed across years and arrives in dozens of small forms that never show up together on a single statement. There is the interest. Every emergency you finance on credit costs more than the emergency itself. The margin is not enormous on any individual event, but over a decade, a person who finances their emergencies through debt versus absorbing them from savings will pay thousands of dollars in interest on events that the savings account person paid nothing extra for. That is real money spent on nothing, which is the most expensive kind of money you can spend. There is the premium. When you cannot pay up front, you sometimes pay more for the same thing. The car dealership financing option costs more than the rate you would get with a better credit profile. The rental application requires a larger deposit when your credit history shows irregular balances. The insurance rate is higher when your credit score is suppressed by revolving card balances that appear because you keep needing to use the card for emergencies. The person without savings pays a premium for financial services across the board, and the premium is invisible until you calculate it. There is the decision compression. When you are financially tight, your options for responding to problems narrow significantly. You cannot take the job with the 3-week delayed start date because 3 weeks of no income would empty your account. You cannot quit the job that is destroying you because you have no runway. You cannot negotiate for a better apartment because you don't have the deposit. You stay in situations longer than they are good for you because leaving requires resources you don't have. This is the cost that never shows up in the math but shapes the life more than anything else. The compression of your options. Every decision made under financial pressure carries the weight of that pressure. And decisions made under pressure are almost always worse than decisions made from stability. You rush. You accept terms you would not accept otherwise. You don't walk away from things that deserve to be walked away from because the cost of walking away is something you cannot currently afford. The emergency fund is not primarily a financial instrument. It is a decision-making instrument. It changes the quality of every significant choice you make because it removes the pressure that distorts the choice. The standard advice is 3 to 6 months of expenses. That phrase appears in every personal finance article ever written, and most people read it and nod and continue not having it, because 3 to 6 months of expenses is an abstract concept until you build it, and building it is not the focus of advice that is mostly about investing and growing wealth and reaching the next level. Let's make it concrete. Your monthly expenses are $3,200. This is your real number, not the number you think it should be. Rent, utilities, groceries, transportation, subscriptions, minimum debt payments, phone, everything that leaves your account every month with consistency. 3 months of that is $9,600. 6 months is $19,200, and that is the target. $9,600 sitting untouched in a high-yield savings account, earning somewhere between 4 and 5% annually at current rates. Not invested in the market, not allocated to index funds. Sitting still and available on a Tuesday when the prescription costs $67 and the checking account is empty. The $9,600 does nothing dramatic. In a year at 4.5%, it generates $432. That is not a return that changes your life. The $432 is not the point. The point is that the $9,600 is there when the $1,400 arrives, and the $1,400 does not go on a credit card and compound at 24%. And the next 4 months of your financial life are not reorganized around paying down the card. The return on an emergency fund is not measured in interest. It is measured in avoided cost, preserved decision-making quality, and the psychological effect of knowing that the next disruption will not break your month. That last one is harder to quantify and more important than either of the financial metrics. Something changes when you have money that is not for spending. It does not change immediately. For the first few months, you check the savings account the way you check the investment account when it is small, with a mixture of mild satisfaction and mild anxiety that it is not larger. You worry about touching it. You worry about scenarios that would require touching it. The account feels fragile even though it's the sturdiest thing in your financial life. Then something happens that used to be a crisis. Maybe the car, maybe a medical bill, maybe a water heater that has been on borrowed time for 2 winters. The event arrives and you go to the savings account and you transfer what you need. The account goes down. You feel it, but you feel it the way you feel a mild inconvenience, not the way you feel a threat. The problem is solved that day, not on a payment plan, not with an informal loan from a family member. That day from an account that existed for exactly this. You rebuild the account over the next 4 months. And the next time something happens, the reaction is different again. Slightly more relaxed, slightly less the sharp chest feeling of financial exposure. The muscle of having the cushion and using it correctly and rebuilding it correctly is building. And the muscle produces a different relationship with money than the one you had before. You also start making different decisions. You apply for the job that requires a 2-week gap between positions, because you can cover 2 weeks. You tell your landlord you will not be renewing the lease, and you have 2 months to find something better because you have 2 months of expenses covered. You decline the service agreement at the electronics store because you understand that an extended warranty is a product the store profits from, and your savings account is a self-funded insurance mechanism that costs you nothing. The decisions are different because the pressure is different. The pressure is different because the cushion exists. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable change in the quality and range of choices available to you. The same income, directed slightly differently for a sustained period of time, produces a materially different life. Not because the income grew, but because the structure around it changed. You have $200 a month that could become the beginning of this. Maybe not $200, maybe $80, maybe $140. If you stop the subscription you've been meaning to cancel, and the coffee that turned into a daily line item when you were not paying attention. The amount matters less than the commitment to a specific one. You open a separate account. Not the same bank. A different institution, slightly harder to reach, slightly less visible in your daily banking interface. The separation is intentional. Money that is easy to access is money that gets accessed. The goal here is not access, it is accumulation. The mild friction of the separate account is a feature. You set an automatic transfer for the day after your paycheck arrives. The transfer happens before you have the opportunity to not make it. You name the account something functional. Emergency fund. Do not touch. 6 months. Whatever makes the purpose clear enough that you do not mentally treat it as accessible money. The first month, you have $140 in the account. This is not enough to cover anything. You know this. The balance is not the point yet. The point is the pattern. The pattern is establishing the behavior before the behavior is rewarded, because the behavior will only be rewarded in a crisis, and you are building the behavior specifically so the crisis is survivable. The second month, you have $280. The third month, $420. Then a month where something happened and you did not contribute. Then $420 again. Then $560. You're 8 months in, and the account has $910 in it. You have not needed it yet, and this feels like a small miracle and also a mild disappointment, because $910 is not 3 months of expenses, and you knew that going in, and the slowness of the accumulation is harder to sit with than you expected. This is the uncomfortable middle section of building anything. The beginning is energizing, the completion will be satisfying. The middle is just the work, producing small numbers on a slow timeline, requiring the discipline to continue without the reward of visible progress. You continue. 14 months in, the account has $1,800. Then something happens. The car. Of course the car. You transfer $1,200 from the emergency account. The problem is solved. The account drops to $600. You do not cancel the automatic transfer. You adjust to a slightly higher amount for the next 6 months to rebuild faster. The account is not back to $1,800 yet, but it will be, and you know it will be. And that knowledge is different from anything you've known before in your relationship with money. You use the thing the way it was meant to be used. You rebuild it the way it was designed to be rebuilt. You have been building for 2 years. The account has $5,400, not 6 months of expenses yet, roughly 1.5 months of your life sitting still. But something has shifted that the number does not fully capture. You have not used a credit card for an emergency in the 18 months. You paid for the dentist from the account. You paid for the unexpected vet bill from the account. You paid for the 3 days of work you missed when you were genuinely ill and could not afford to feel guilty about resting because the 3 days of missed pay was within the buffer. The credit card balance that used to sit at $1,800 on average is now $0. You pay it monthly. The interest rate is irrelevant because you never carry a balance. You're no longer paying 24% on emergencies you could not absorb. The credit score is higher. Not because you did anything specifically for the score, because the behavior that produces scores, low utilization, on-time payments, consistent account management, is now the behavior you have by a default. The score improved as a side effect of having the cushion. The rate on the car loan you took last spring was 6.2%. The rate on the previous car loan, taken 3 years earlier without the cushion and with the inconsistent card behavior, was 11.4%. The same car at a different rate. The savings account did not directly produce that difference. The financial behavior the savings account enabled to produce that difference. The cascade of effects from a single funded account is wide, quiet, and rarely discussed in the same conversation as the account itself. The 3 months of expenses target arrives eventually. It arrives not with a dramatic moment, but with a specific Tuesday morning when you open the account and the number crosses $9,600, and you sit with it for a moment before going on with the day. You have 3 months of your life covered. Every disruption that fits within $9,600, and most disruptions do fit within $9,600, can now be absorbed without reorganizing the month around it. Job loss is different now. Not comfortable, not a non-event, but different. You have 90 days of runway before the crisis becomes existential. In 90 days, a lot can happen. A new job can be found. A severance can be negotiated. A side income can be activated. The 90 days is not just financial. It is the space to think clearly, to negotiate from a position that is not desperation, to make decisions that are not driven by the pressure of an empty account. Your friends are not here. That is not a judgment. Most people are not here. The Federal Reserve data makes that clear, and so does a decade of surveys that keep producing the same uncomfortable number about $400 emergencies. Most people are navigating their financial lives with essentially no insulation between their current state and a disruption that costs more than one paycheck. You are not in that group anymore. The transition from that group to this group did not require a high income. It did not require an inheritance or a windfall or a perfect year. It required deciding that the cushion mattered more than the consumption, that was using up the margin and then setting up the automatic transfer, and then leaving it alone, and then rebuilding it when it got used, and then not touching it for anything that was not genuinely an emergency. That is the entire mechanism. It is not complex, it is just continuous. When the cushion is funded, something shifts in how you think about the rest of the financial picture. Before it was funded, investing felt premature. The logic was sound, if imprecise. Why invest $200 a month when the next car repair will put $1,400 on a 24% card and reverse 6 months of investment gains in a single event? The emergency fund is in that sense the prerequisite to effective investing. Not because the math is always optimal. Sometimes it makes sense to do both simultaneously, but because the behavior of a person who knows they have no cushion and the behavior of a person with a funded cushion are genuinely different. And the investment decisions they make under those different conditions are different in quality and consistency. The person without a cushion checks the investment account from fear. A market drop looks like a threat to be managed, not a cycle to be held through. When the market drops 15% and the portfolio drops $3,000 and there's no savings account to absorb a simultaneous emergency, the temptation to sell, to stop the bleeding, to liquidate and stabilize is real, and it is dangerous. Most of the money lost in market corrections is not lost from the market. It is transferred from the people who sold at the bottom to the people who held through it. And the people who sold did so disproportionately because they had no other source of resilience in their financial life. The person with a funded cushion holds, not because they are more sophisticated or more disciplined in some intrinsic sense, because they can. Because the investment account is not their only layer of financial insulation, because the market dropping 15% does not threaten their rent, does not threaten the car payment, does not threaten the Tuesday prescription. The cushion makes the investor. So the next chapter after funding the emergency account is investing with the clarity that only a cushion investor has access to. The personal finance industry produces enormous volumes of content about compounding returns, about index funds and market timing and the optimal asset allocation for a 35-year-old with a moderate risk tolerance. It produces very little content about what happens in the space between earning money and investing it, which is where most people actually live most of the time, and where the decisions that determine whether investing ever becomes possible are made or not made. The gap is not about knowledge. It is not about access to information. The information about emergency funds and why they matter is freely available and has been for decades. The gap is about the specific felt sense of what your life looks like without one, and what it costs you over years, in slow, accumulating ways that never feel like a crisis, but continuously redirect your resources away from the things that would build something durable. The pharmacy counter at $67 is not the headline. The headline is the 8 years of decisions made under the pressure of not having the cushion. The loan that was taken because there was no alternative. The job that was stayed in because leaving required a runway that did not exist. The raise that was not negotiated because the risk of disruption during negotiation they felt too large to absorb. The financial decisions made in a compressed state that kept every good decision slightly worse than it needed to be. All of that is the cost of the account that was never built. You are reading this and you either have the cushion or you don't. If you do, you know what it changed. You know the specific difference in how you handled the last unexpected thing. You know the version of yourself that existed before it was funded, and the version that exists now, and the difference is real, and it lives in the quality of the decisions you make every month, not just in the account balance. If you don't, you are somewhere in the experience this script has been describing. Not in crisis, necessarily. Just narrow. Just adjacent to the next thing that will require resources you don't currently have deployed for this purpose. The account to open is a high-yield savings account at an online institution. Current rates are in the 4 to 5% range, depending on the institution and the rate environment. The account is separate from your checking, slightly harder to access, named for its purpose. The automatic transfer is set for the day after your paycheck lands. The amount is whatever you can make automatic and consistent. It does not need to be large. It needs to be reliable. You will have $200 in it after the first month, then $400, then $600, and then a month where something happened and it stayed at $600 and then $800. You will watch the number move slowly enough that you will question whether the behavior is worth continuing. Continue anyway. The number is not the result. The number is the proof that the behavior is occurring. The behavior is the result. The behavior is what prevents the Tuesday pharmacy counter moment. The behavior is what changes the quality of every decision made when the next disruption arrives. The behavior is what eventually funds the account that makes investing without panic possible. The behavior is the first chapter of every other chapter that follows. You don't need the full amount to start. You don't need a plan that accounts for every scenario. You don't need to know the exact month when the account will be fully funded. You need the account and the transfer and the consistent month after month decision to leave the money there when it would be easier to use it for something that is not an emergency. Those decisions, repeated, produce the cushion. The cushion produces the life on the other side of the Tuesday pharmacy counter moment. That life is not dramatically different in any given week. It is structurally different across years in ways that compound quietly and produce a materially different person, standing at a different point on the same road. The account opens. The transfer is set. The month passes. Nothing dramatic happens. That is exactly what it is supposed to feel like. That is what security feels like. Before you know that is what it is. If you are still reading this, you already know what to do. The only version of this story that ends without regret is the one where the transfer happens today.